You know, in transgressing roles of class, Jesus was a threat to the social system of the day. The Roman occupiers didn't like that. It was a rigidly structured society in which everyone was expected to play their role and stay in their place. And in the life of Jesus, God comes out as something that no one anticipated. That certainly very few of his day understood. But the story doesn't end there. You see, the divine coming out continues. Because in Easter, which was unexpected to be sure, the divine presence in the life of this human Jesus, called the Christ, the Messiah, the Anointed One. The power of empire had done its worst, had laid on him the ultimate sanction. And yet, in the gift of Easter, we see God coming out quite literally of that tomb, saying, I'm still here. And then when Jesus ascended and returned to God, the disciples were afraid. Here we are, we're alone again. And then the day of Pentecost came. And God came out yet again in the form of the Spirit, descending as a violent wind and tongues of fire which descended and came to rest on each of them. And they were filled, we're told, with the Holy Spirit. And they began to speak in new ways as the Spirit gave them ability. You know, I wonder sometimes if church folk, as much as we love to celebrate holidays like Pentecost, I wonder if sometimes we're as open to the message as we need to be. The disciples, on receiving the gift of the Spirit, began to speak in new ways as the Spirit gave them ability. Are we being enabled to speak in new ways? Or when new people come to the church, do we expect them to learn our language? You know, that's why we don't particularly use a lot of highfalutin theological language in this church. We try to be as plain spoken as possible, because it's not right that we expect people who come here to learn how to hear the message. It's up to us to learn to communicate that message in ways that people can hear the good news of God, each in their own language. The Spirit is continuing to empower us to speak in new ways. We do it oftentimes with technology. We take our message to the World Wide Web, and people listen to that. We're going to be doing it shortly through video sermons online. You know, YouTube speaks to an entire generation that has not had the opportunity to hear the good news that, yes, God's love includes you. Doesn't matter whether you've got tattoos, doesn't matter whether you have piercings, doesn't matter if you dress with jeans that have 17,000 holes in them. You buy them that way now. Doesn't matter if your language is different, if you don't understand all the highfalutin church talk. This is for you too. And we're willing to learn to speak to you in ways that you understand. You know, I heard a story to illustrate what I'm talking about. There was a court case in which a traffic stop had been made, and the arresting officer was under cross-examination. And the district attorney asked him, "And how were you attired when you pulled the defendant over?" And the officer had a puzzled look on his face, and he asked the DA to repeat the question. And she did. And he asked her to repeat it again. And finally, and with great hesitation, in response to the question, "How were you attired when you pulled over the defendant?" the officer said, "I was traveling on standard issue radial tires." You know, sometimes we're not as clear as we think we are. Sometimes our understanding needs a bit of expansion. But thankfully, God's presence in the Spirit lives within us and fills us to overflowing. Fills us so much that our very bodies, our very lives cannot contain that divine love and grace and empowerment. And consequently, it flows forth from us and washes over. That's those streams of living water flowing forth from the believers that Jesus was talking about. That living water, freely given, flows from each one of us and touches the hearts and the lives of the people we meet on life's journey. That's good news. The God of judgment has been left in the past. God has come out as someone we did not expect, and our lives are the richer for it. And yet we continue to look for what we already have. The case is told of a shark and a whale who were both swimming along through the ocean. And the shark swam up alongside the whale and struck up a conversation. The shark said to the whale, "Friend, you are older and wiser than I. You have been around much, much longer. Can you tell me, where do I find the ocean?" And the whale responded, "What do you mean, where do you find the ocean? You're in it. This is what you're swimming in." And the shark didn't believe and swam away, still searching for the ocean. Don't look for what you already have. Just open yourself to experiencing that power and presence at work in your heart and your life. Because God is here right now, filling you, connecting you and you, bridging all the gaps that would seek to divide us, enabling us to relate and to truly communicate and understand one another. And it all happens because we're filled to overflowing with God's Spirit. You know, sometimes we don't know the ultimate effects of the random acts of love and senseless kindness that we perform in life. Sometimes we wonder if it has any impact. Case in point, earlier this past year, I was interviewed for a documentary about Westboro Baptist Church, which has since, I understand, appeared online. And I received this letter. Don't worry, it's not on lined paper, and yes, it is signed. You know those letters? Whenever a pastor opens an envelope that has no return address, that's written on lined paper, and it's not signed, immediately you know what kind of letter it is. But this letter says, I'm so relieved. I'm just going to read you a few excerpts. I'm so relieved to have found an MCC in Topeka. The reason for my sense of relief is I have watched the documentaries online about the Westboro Baptist Church. Each time I watch those people, I find it heartbreaking. I'm a mental health practitioner, and as an openly gay member of the community, I can testify how bad it is over here in terms of homophobia. So I congratulate you for finding the courage and conviction to do the Lord's work in the face of such hatred. And it's signed, and it's from Belfast, Northern Ireland. When we engage in ministry, sometimes we do not know how far-reaching the effects of our words and our actions can be. But just because we don't know where it's all going to end up doesn't mean that it's not worth doing. We were never promised that life would always be easy. We were just promised that it would be worth it. And filled to overflowing with the gift of God's presence, leading and guiding us every day, we, like the early church, come out of that locked room and move forward in faith. God bless you this morning.